and ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We are here today to consider three legislative measures. H.R. 1607, a bill to clarify jurisdiction with respect to certain Bureau of Reclamation pump storage development, sponsored by Representative Schweikert of Arizona. H.R. 3027, the Reclamation Climate Change and Water Program Authorization Act of 2023, sponsored by Representative Porter of California. And H.R. 3675, the Western Water Accelerated Revenue Repayment Act, sponsored by Representative Boebert of Colorado. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. Today we're meeting to discuss the three Bureau of Reclamation bills just mentioned. First, H.R. 1607, introduced by Mr. Schweikert of Arizona, which would extend the current Bureau of Reclamation withdrawal of land from Forest Service property on the Salt River in Arizona by a maximum of 2 miles in order to clarify jurisdiction and facilitate the development of pumped storage hydropower. Pumped storage hydropower utilizes two water reservoirs at different elevations to generate power by moving water down from one reservoir to the other through turbines. Next, H.R. 3027, introduced by Ms. Porter of California, would reauthorize the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Smart Basin Studies program until 2033. I know Ms. Porter is aware that her bill would require changes to ensure compliance with our floor protocols. This includes a 7-year sunset and funding levels equal to or less than the fiscal year 2023 funding levels. Last, H.R. 3675, introduced by Ms. Boebert of Colorado, would extend authorities that allow Bureau of Reclamation project water users to prepay what they owe to the federal government. This bill continues what was a program created under the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nations Act, which was signed into law by President Obama in 2016. Unless specifically authorized, most Bureau of Reclamation projects do not have the ability to make early payments to the U.S. Treasury. More than 80 entities took advantage of this program. Clearly, it was successful. With that, I look forward to hearing from our members and witnesses before us today. I now recognize Ranking Member Huffman for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin, I'd like to ask unanimous consent for Representative Greg Stanton of Arizona to participate in today's hearing.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for joining us for today's hearing on three bills relating to the Bureau of Reclamation. The Bureau serves as the largest wholesaler of water in the country, providing water to more than 30 million people and 1 out of 5 farmers in the American West. I look forward to hearing more about the bills on the agenda today and how they will affect Reclamation's work. The first bill we'll discuss is Representative Schweikert's H.R. 1607. This would reserve certain lands to the United States specifically for the development, generation, and transmission of electrical power and energy for the use of the Salt River Federal Reclamation Project. The legislation has been proposed to assist that project in Arizona to expand pump storage for hydropower facilities to meet increasing energy demands, and I look forward to hearing more about the effects of this bill. In general, I like pumped hydropower a lot as a resource and a strategy. The next bill on the agenda is Representative Boebert's H.R. 3675. This bill would permanently reauthorize a section of the WIN Act to allow federal water contractors to convert their federal water contracts to permanent contracts. It would also allow water contractors to pay back their repayment obligations to taxpayers at a discounted rate and eliminate important requirements, specifically the requirement that contractors pay the full cost of water on farms larger than 960 acres. The committee has heard similar legislation over the years regarding accelerated prepayment. And before the passage of the WIN Act, the Obama administration, taxpayer advocacy groups, and many others raised significant concerns about provisions like this. These concerns are just as relevant today, and they should be fully considered before moving forward with this legislation. The final bill on the agenda is Representative Porter's H.R. 3027, the Reclamation, Climate Change, and Water Program Reauthorization Act. It would reauthorize Reclamation's successful basin study program, which helps water managers plan and develop water strategies responding to climate change. We have already completed 19 basin studies that have helped identify and analyze approaches and strategies to meet future water needs using the best available scientific information. Ms. Porter's legislation would reauthorize this program to ensure water management strategies assess the risks and impacts of climate change on our water resources. This is a big deal. As the West continues to endure the effects of drought, it is critical that federal technical experts effectively collaborate with state, tribal, and local water managers to address water supply and demand imbalances. I hope today's hearing will facilitate a robust discussion in which we can work together towards true bipartisan solutions to address water management needs in the West. And with that, I yield back.
I will now introduce our first panel. As is typical with legislative hearings, the bill sponsors are recognized for 5 minutes each to discuss their bills. With us today, or soon to join us, are Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman Katie Porter, and Congressman David Swikert. I now recognize Ms. Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am proud to testify in support of H.R. 3675, my Western Water Accelerated Revenue Repayment Act. This common sense bill follows bipartisan precedent by allowing agriculture and municipal water users to prepay what they owe to the federal government. This prepayment generates early revenue for the Treasury while also decreasing federal paperwork requirements and operating costs for water users. Without this authority, the vast majority of irrigation districts do not have the ability to make an early repayment to the Treasury. This is like telling a homeowner who has a mortgage that they cannot make early payments to pay it off, or like telling someone with a 5-year car loan they cannot pay off anything early and must wait the full 5 years. Under current law, Bureau of Reclamation water storage and delivery projects costs are allocated to the project beneficiaries. Under the beneficiary pays principle, irrigation and water districts that have contracts with the federal government for water delivered from the Bureau of Reclamation projects must repay the costs that they are allocated. As long as the repayment obligation exists, these water users have to jump through more red tape, burdensome paperwork, requirements, and limitations on how much acreage a farmer is allowed to plant. Prior to the passage of this provision, if water users wanted to repay what they owed early, Congress would have to enact a federal law authorizing the repayment. Prior to its expiration in 2020, the Bureau of Reclamation entered into agreements with 86 contractors for contract prepayments. This ultimately generated $344 million for water storage account funding. One of those contractors that took advantage of this authority is located in my district, the Florida Water Conservancy District in Durango, Colorado. It utilizes the prepayment option back in 2019 for the Lemon Dam, which is a reclamation project on the Florida River. They support this legislation and called this process smooth as silk. My bill is supported by many groups, including the Florida Water Conservancy District in Durango, Mesa County Farm Bureau, the Mesa County Commissioners, the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority, and many others. In their letter of support, the National Water Resources Association stated, "This added tool will assist water systems in managing their operations in the most effective and efficient way possible at the time of rising costs and higher interest rates. The immense water resource challenges in the Western United States require a strong partnership and regular collaboration between the water community and federal agencies." Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit this letter that I'm quoting from to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I encourage the committee to continue to move on this common sense bill and move it forward through the committee to see its ultimate passage. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Boebert. I now recognize Ms. Porter for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Most people who want to hear a one-liner go to a comedy club, not to a congressional hearing. But today, y'all are lucky. I'm going to give you 2 one-liners. Here's the first one. How many lawmakers does it take to extend a program that provides our constituents with water? I know, that's not funny. I guess you can see why I don't do stand-up. Actually, what worries me about the very serious question that I asked is that I don't know the answer. Reclamation Basin Study Program is going to expire in September, and Washington still hasn't acted. We are running out of time before our September deadline. Are we going to extend the program or miss the target? That brings me to my second one-liner. A one-line bill to extend the program. Here's the line. Section 9503F of the Omnibus Public Land Management Act of 2009 is amended by striking 2023, and hold it for the punchline, inserting 2033. This one-liner isn't a joke either. It is a solution that keeps this program intact without increasing its funding or changing any policy. It's a proposal that helps people retain access to water. And that is actually no joke. That's actually very serious. This one line means that Colorado Basin states will continue to have the tools needed to assess water supply and identify long-term challenges that serve as a baseline that help water utilities make informed decisions about providing water to Western Americans. This one line means that the Bureau of Reclamation can continue to assure utilities that they are operating from the same baseline and encourage innovative partnerships and conservation programs and policies to sustain current and future supplies. Washington needs to pass my clean extension, just one line, of the Reclamation Basin Study Program. If making sure our constituents don't go thirsty wasn't enough, I'm even prepared to sweeten the deal. I have agreed to legislative changes if my bill, my one-liner, advances to markup. To comply with current House rules, I've agreed to change the 10-year reauthorization to an authorization of 7 years at the annual level most recently provided to the program, $15.017 million. If anyone can find any other changes that I could make to this incredibly short bill, I'm all ears. There aren't too many words left to scrutinize. You want a different title? Let's talk. But people are tired of all the talk from Washington. This bill should be a no-brainer. I'm a teacher. I used to always tell my students, you don't have to wait to the last minute to do your homework. We don't need to wait to September 2023 when this program expires to reauthorize it. We can do it now. This bill, with debilitating droughts, stopping our constituents from going thirsty should be a top priority. And we have a straightforward solution right now. If we believe in protecting water utilities and users, this bill should advance without delay to a markup and then to a House floor vote under the suspension of the rules. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. I now recognize Mr. Spikert for 5 minutes.
And you snuck up on me there, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. I'm actually here to make the pitch on HR 1607. It's a pump storage. For those of you who may know Arizona, we have a couple unique sources of water. One is we fight with our friends in California over the Colorado River, but we also have our own watershed. There's something called the Salt River Project. It is a really, really unique quasi-municipality. It actually predates statehood, which is sort of amazing to think about. But within that is a chain of lakes in these brutally rugged mountains. But it turns out that Stanton is an expert on this. He knows this as well as any of us. In there is an opportunity to do what we call pump storage. And within that is the uniqueness for those of us in the desert Southwest. We actually have time during parts of the day because of our photovoltaic portfolio, where our solar, where power basically almost falls to minimal price. The concept of pump up, and when the sun goes down and the air conditioners are running, run the water back down the cliff. It's a terrific spot. It mathematically looks like it works. We just need the direction with the managing partner, which we hope will be Salt River Project, or we assume, and the Bureau of Reclamation, which is actually the true owner and controller of the land, and then obviously the neighboring Park Service. So that's what, and Mr. Stanton and I have this concept and would like it to continue to move forward. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stryker. I thank the members for their testimony. I'll now introduce our second panel, Mr. Michael Brain, Deputy Commissioner, Bureau. I'm sorry, Mr. Stanton. Does Mr. Stanton?
We're not gonna allow them. You're gonna allow questions of the members about the bill, or no? Well, I thought Stanton might.
We will indulge a short statement. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you for the opportunity to join the subcommittee for today's hearing. I, too, want to speak in favor of H.R. 1607, an issue that's of great importance to my home state of Arizona. The population in the Phoenix metro area, already one of the most populous regions in the country, is growing rapidly, and our economy is growing right along with it, bringing new energy demands. Back home, we're already seeing daily temperatures in the hundreds. The hot summer months are when demand for electricity are at its highest. That's why it's so critical for our region to invest in our energy infrastructure. Having a robust, diverse, renewable energy mix, including hydropower, makes our power grid more resilient and better able to meet the demands of our constituents. Congressman Schweikert and I teamed up to introduce H.R. 1607 to help enable the evaluation and exploration of additional pump storage hydropower facilities to the Salt River Reservoir system, which serves more than 2 million energy customers in the greater Phoenix area. Pumped hydropower storage uses excess electricity when demand is low, like during the day when renewables like solar panels are generating power, to pump water to higher elevation reservoir. Throughout the nights when the other renewable resources are ramping down, that water can be used to generate hydropower to provide electricity to customers. Not only do pump storage projects help integrate renewable energy into our power grid, they provide greater flexibility and reliability for the entire system. And critically, it cuts utility costs for Arizona families and businesses, and I hope the committee will move quickly with this bill, and thank my colleagues for their support. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. I thank the members for their testimony. I'll now introduce our second panel, Mr. Michael Brain, Deputy Commissioner, Bureau of Reclamation, Washington, D.C., Mr. Cannon Michaels, Chairman, San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority, Banos, California, and Ms. Leslie Myers, Associate General Manager and Chief Water Resources Executive, Salt River Project, Tempe, Arizona. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the talk button on the microphone. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of the 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. I now recognize Deputy Commissioner Brain for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Bentz, Ranking Member Huffman, members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to provide Interior's views on the bills before you today. My name is Michael Brain, and I have the privilege of serving as the Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation within the Department of the Interior. As you are aware, the West is experiencing unprecedented drought, and in Western watersheds, there have been successive and compounding years of dry hydrology. The drought highlights the need for immediate actions as well as for thoughtful planning and on-the-ground work to make both our infrastructure and our operational decisions more resilient. Meeting Reclamation's mission today means addressing drought resilience, water security, issues of equity, climate change adaptation, and ecosystem health. Fortunately, with the resources made available by Congress through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, Reclamation has been able to prioritize and accelerate projects that will help us to respond to the issues that we are faced with. In the year and a half that Reclamation has been charged with implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are proud of our efforts to engage with our tribal, stakeholder, and congressional partners. Due to the strength of these partnerships and the hard work of Reclamation's dedicated staff, we have allocated $2.5 billion of bipartisan infrastructure law funding to 369 projects across 12 program areas and in all 17 western states, plus Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Reclamation has issued more than a dozen bipartisan infrastructure law-related funding opportunities to date, with more on the way for the rest of 2023. We've established new programs in small storage, aquatic ecosystem restoration, and environmental water resource projects, and planning and design. Aging infrastructure account funding made available in the bipartisan infrastructure law has enabled numerous major rehabilitation activities on facilities maintained by our partners that would otherwise have been difficult to realize, such as major lining projects on the New York and Truckee canals that will improve safety, reduce long-term maintenance needs, and conserve precious water supplies. Additionally, in fiscal year 2022, Reclamation distributed higher than ever one-year investment of $420 million in the Rural Water Program across 6 projects, some that benefit tribal areas. In fiscal year 2023, we announced $278 million across 7 projects. We also allotted $60 million for the Arkansas Valley Conduit project, which benefits disadvantaged Americans and was able to break ground a year ago, last month. In addition to funding announcements that have already taken place in the Colorado River Basin, Reclamation anticipates making additional announcements pertaining to other sections of the Inflation Reduction Act this summer. Like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, the legislation being considered today seeks to address the challenges we currently face and those we will face in the future. For example, H.R. 1607 will increase energy storage through a pumped storage project that will help Reclamation meet its mission to deliver power by improving grid reliability, avoiding transmission congestion, and potential interruptions in energy supply. This bill does not grant Reclamation any new authorities, but will allow the Salt River project to continue its path towards construction. The department supports this bill and looks forward to working with the bill sponsor and the subcommittee on technical edits. Additionally, H.R. 3027, which would reauthorize Reclamation's climate change and water program, gives Reclamation and our stakeholders the tools we need to address long-term challenges posed by climate change and shifting hydrologic realities. The department supports this bill and the reauthorization of the climate change and water program. Lastly, H.R. 3675 would allow for expedited repayment of irrigation construction obligations, making more funding available for additional water storage needs, as well as providing additional flexibility for Reclamation's water users and contract holders. The department looks forward to working with the bill sponsor and the subcommittee to address technical edits. The department recognizes the bills before the committee today seek to address the impacts from the ongoing drought, building a more resilient infrastructure and ecosystems, and appreciates the work of all the bill sponsors. I look forward to discussing this legislation in more detail and to continuing to work with the committee and the bill sponsors on potential technical edits as they move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And I now recognize Mr. Michael for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bentz, Ranking Member Huffman, members of the subcommittee. It's a pleasure to be here. I do feel quite a long way from the farm sitting here in front of you, but a pleasure to be here. My name's Cannon Michael. I run my family's farming operation in the Central Valley of California. We grow over 20 different crops, both organic and conventional. We also manage wildlife habitat that we own adjacent to the Grasslands Wildlife Management Area. And we have a active compost center on the farm where we're taking green waste from urban centers to turn it into valuable compost on the farm and help avoid the organics going into landfills. Over my career in farming, I've become interested in California water issues, and obviously it's essential to farming, but it's also essential to our communities and to all those around us in the environment. I became chairman of the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority because of my interest in that organization and our 27 members that have quite a bit of diversity with urban representatives of San Benito and Santa Clara. So over 2 million residents of California fall underneath the authority's umbrella, as well as over 1.2 million acres of irrigated farmland and over 130,000 acres of wetland habitat being the grassland. So ag, urban, and environmental users all working together, which is essentially how I see the most sustainable pathway in terms of California water. And I am a director on the board of directors of the Family Farm Alliance. I'm here today on behalf of testifying about H.R. 3675, and thanks to Congresswoman Boebert for bringing this forward. There's been a lot of discussion about the streamlining effect this bill would have and the help that it is for our members. Actually, for the Water Authority, almost all of our members took advantage of this opportunity under the WIN Act. You can find in my written testimony quite a bit more detail. I think one of the most important aspects of this bill is the provision that the funds repaid to the federal government will be deposited in the water storage account that can be used to construct new water facilities, which are desperately needed, not just in California, but throughout the West. Infrastructure is really the backbone of California. We saw certainly this year the importance in the extreme wet hydrology of the existing above-ground storage investments that were made many years ago to protect communities such as Sacramento and also provide the flood control benefits. I think we also, with the excessive hydrology, saw quite a bit of a missed opportunity in terms of a lot of water that was not able to be captured. So having additional funding for water storage is critical. And I would also highlight, in light of climate change, cold water for anadromous fish is going to become increasingly important. And so having some of that infrastructure will provide cold water pool for fish, which is important. So again, our members have seen a huge benefit. As was stated earlier, more than 80 entities have pursued that prepayment. I believe there's 200 still that, or up to 200 that could still take part in this. And so certainly seems like an opportunity that should be extended and opened up to others. And again, it's been very beneficial for our folks. So I'm happy to take some questions. And with that, I will yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Michael, and I now recognize Ms. Myers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz, Ranking Member Huffman, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Leslie Myers, the Associate General Manager and Chief Water Executive for the Salt River Project. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 1607, legislation clarifying the Bureau of Reclamation's jurisdiction over the development of hydro pumps. SRP has been serving Arizona since 1903, almost 10 years before Arizona became the 48th state. Today, we're the third largest not-for-profit, community-based public power entity in the country, providing sustainable, reliable, and affordable electricity to nearly 3 million people. SRP is also the largest raw water provider in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Formed at the turn of the 20th century to contract with the federal government for construction of Theodore Roosevelt Dam, SRP manages and operates 7 Bureau of Reclamation dams and reservoirs. SRP began generating hydropower in 1906, later incorporating pumpback storage between the reservoirs to provide resiliency to the system. Today, SRP's diverse energy portfolio includes solar, wind, geothermal, natural gas, coal, nuclear, and of course, hydropower. As SRP adds significantly more solar to our power system, we will need long-duration storage to store excess solar generated during the day and to dispatch it overnight to ensure reliable service around the clock. SRP is currently incorporating 1,100 megawatts of new 4-hour battery storage. Additionally, we're developing an option of adding 2,000 megawatts of longer duration pump storage along Apache Lake on the Salt River that will be capable of generating power for up to 10 to 12 hours. Simply put, pump storage facilities push water uphill from a lower reservoir to an upper reservoir when energy is available, like when solar is generating during the day. Then, when energy is needed back on the grid, water is allowed to flow back downhill through the turbines to generate electricity. Pump storage facilities are straightforward and proven technology, and in this case, will use existing infrastructure. SRP is evaluating 2 sites for the development of new pump storage. Both are located almost entirely on National Forest System lands previously withdrawn for reclamation purposes by Congress and the Secretary of Interior, specifically to store water and generate hydropower for the beneficiaries of the Salt River Federal Reclamation Project. A portion of both of those sites lie just outside the existing withdrawal. H.R. 1607 addresses this deficiency by extending the existing withdrawal to cover both sites, which clarifies jurisdiction and facilitates project development. The extension provided in H.R. 1607 would align the development and management of any new pump storage facility with SRP's current care, operation, and management of our existing reclamation facilities. To provide historical context, Congress and the Secretary of Interior have withdrawn National Forest System lands on the Salt River Project watersheds more than 50 times since 1903 to facilitate appropriate development and operation of the reclamation project components, like dams, reservoirs, canals, pipelines, and our hydropower facilities. It's important to note that this legislation does not remove the need for any federal or state environmental permitting or public input processes or tribal consultations. SRP is committed to working with federal agencies, tribal nations, and many other stakeholders interested in this project. The Bureau of Reclamation, Tonto National Forest, and SRP will continue to coordinate on land management decisions within the proposed withdrawal, just as we do today under an existing tri-party agreement. Thank you, Chairman Benz and Member Hoffman, for this opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering questions and hope that we can continue to build off this important work being done under H.R. 1607.
Thank you. And I'll thank the witnesses for their testimony, and I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each. For their questions, we'll begin with Representative Hageman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Brain, I just have a couple of real quick questions for you. You talked an awful lot about climate change in your statement. What have you done in terms of working with the National Forest Service to address the mismanagement of our national forests, the catastrophic forest fires, pine beetle outbreak, and those kinds of things in terms of the impact on our reservoirs in the interior West?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. We work collaboratively with a number of our sister agencies throughout the federal government. I'll be happy to get back to you on the specifics of exactly how we collaborate with them, and we have.
You don't have those answers today?
I don't, ma'am, but I can tell you.
But you can talk a lot about climate change, but you won't talk. You can't talk about the impact of the Forest Service that they're having on our reservoirs in the interior West?
In an effort to accurately answer your question, I'd like to get back with you with the specifics of those interactions, but I can tell you that we do share science with them to ensure that they're making decisions based off of the best available science that we have in the federal government.
Sure. And I'd also like to thank the gentlelady from Colorado for introducing H.R. 3675, which I'm proud to co-sponsor. It allows water users to make payments more quickly and remove the burden of lengthy reporting requirements established by the Reclamation Reform Act. It accelerates Treasury receipts while ensuring that all actual obligations for repayment are met, being repaid at present value. Perhaps most importantly, as Mr. Michael highlighted in his testimony, this legislation will increase certainty for contractors regarding their long-term water supply, and providing this kind of certainty is extremely important to the West. Mr. Michael, you highlighted in your testimony the need to incentivize construction of additional water storage so that we can catch more water in wet periods, such as what we've seen this winter and this spring. Mr. Michael, how have you already seen the success of the water infrastructure improvements for the nation, or the WIN Act, which we intend to permanently reauthorize through this legislation, strengthen Western water storage capacity. How has the WIN Act impacted that?
The WIN Act has given opportunities for our members to pursue numerous different projects. So in addition to the contract repayment, which has been very helpful, it's also incentivized under the Water Smart program many different projects within our member agencies to help accelerate, again, creative solutions to deal with the water supply challenges that we have. So it's really an ability to put more dollars to work and more projects on the table.
Well, and you also highlighted in your testimony that it is typical for water users to continue making these payments for 40 to 50 years through a repayment contract or water services contract on top of the operations and maintenance facility payments. How have you seen the process of needing to do this annually stifle the confidence of developers and ultimately prevent water projects from being developed?
It's just another layer of difficulty and just challenge of every year filing, numerous papers, and our districts are already challenged with a number of regulatory requirements, and it just adds to the strain already, and speaks to the affordability for our water users to have, a huge amount of staff time taken up with the reporting requirements, and on top of everything else we have to do.
Just more bureaucratic red tape.
A lot more work.
Okay. So is it safe to say that the length and complexity of the current process detours water project development?
I don't think it helps. Definitely doesn't help at a time when we certainly need acceleration versus more difficulties.
Well, and you specifically stated that the RRA required extensive reporting and paperwork each year for water delivered to lands in excess of the established limits, but that prepayments open the door to removing these limitations. I have constituents who have been forced to either pay heavy fees or establish new entities every time a new operation exceeds 960 acres. I have one constituent who called in because he's had to establish 5 different entities at the recommendation of the Bureau of Reclamation, by the way, to avoid these fees. Does this legislation allow irrigators bound by the 960 limitation to no longer be subject to those requirements if they make the prepayments?
Yeah, that is correct. And I would say that in California, especially the regulatory burdens and just the cost in all aspects are forcing scale for a lot of farms. And so if you're operating, it's more efficient to have scale and effective. So again, it's helpful to have that.
Thank you. And that's excellent. This is a great piece of legislation. I'm deeply appreciative of the gentle lady from Colorado for leading on this. And I will take you up on that offer. I'd sure like to find out the information from the Bureau of Reclamation as to what they're doing to work with the U.S. Forest Service to prevent the kind of catastrophes that we've seen that impact our reservoirs and our ability to store water. I look forward to that information.
Certainly, Congresswoman, we
Thank
look
you.
forward to it as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hageman. The chair recognizes Ranking Member Huffman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the heavy burdensome fees that were just being discussed for farms over 960 acres, the translation for folks that don't know some of this arcane lingo, that means you just pay the full cost of the water. You don't get a subsidy. The terms we use are very important sometimes. So, Mr. Brain, I want to ask you a little more about H.R. 3675. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, prior language along these lines has been objected to by taxpayer advocates and many others. H.R. 3675 would permanently codify this language, and in testimony before this committee with a previous version of this language, the Obama administration said, and I quote, "There are concerns with the financial and discounting language in the bill, including the offer of a discounted repayment." And the testimony goes on to cite the, quote, "discounting at half the Treasury rate with respect to outstanding contractor repayment obligations." The legislation before us today would permanently extend that same discounting repayment at 1/2 the Treasury rate for federal water contractors, which was only in place for 5 years when this language passed, when it was at the last minute inserted into the WIN Act. And when the CBO took a look at this in 2014, it found that taxpayers would lose $530 million in foregone receipts to the Treasury over the period from 2025 to 2050. So Deputy Commissioner Brain, I want to just ask if if the Bureau has assessed the long-term effects of this legislation with respect to payments to the Treasury, and if in fact this would result in significant losses to the Treasury, foregone receipts from federal water contractors, is that something that would concern you?
Thank you so much for the question, Ranking Member Huffman. We have not assessed the long-term impacts. The reality is that it would result in reduced payments into the reclamation fund, but it would also result in increased payments into the storage account that was mentioned earlier. So without knowing which entities, which reclamation partners are specifically interested in utilizing this authority, it's a little difficult to gauge what the potential scope of the potential problem could be.
If it resulted in significant losses to the Treasury, though, is that something that would be a concern?
Yes, no, it certainly would be. You know, from our perspective, the reclamation fund really is something we rely on very heavily to respond to drought. One of our main concerns, however, with the legislation is that the funds that would be going into the storage account would actually be, or funds that would be meant to be kept for project purposes would be going into the storage account. So there could be some unintended consequences there, and we would be happy to work with the committee on technical amendments that would address those concerns.
Appreciate that. I want to ask about the acreage limitation piece. Concerns have also been raised about allowing water contractors to immediately convert to new contracts that won't require interest charges for all water delivered above that 960-acre threshold, essentially accelerating the delivery of federally subsidized water beyond small farms to large farming operations. That's a significant public policy departure. And I just want to ask if you could tell us how the Reclamation Reform Act requirements that codified that acreage limitation would change for contractors who converted their water contractors under the terms of this bill.
Thank you again for the question, Ranking Member Huffman. You know, a reclamation principle, a longstanding principle, has been beneficiary pays. I believe you mentioned it earlier. Two of the contractual mechanisms whereby the beneficiary does pay for projects is the water service contract and long-term contracts. Allowing stakeholders, which has been done in the past utilizing this authority, to convert from the first type of contract to a longer-term contract, but also pay it up front, would have impacts. And one of the impacts would mean that they would satisfy their obligations of the contract sooner, meaning that they will have fulfilled their obligations on the Reclamation Reform Act sooner than they would have.
And subsidized water would go to larger farms, right?
Perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Huffman. Chair recognizes Congressman Lamalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Michael, you mentioned that funds received from prepayment or accelerated payment are held in a treasury account to be used for funding additional water storage projects, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So California obviously needs to accelerate its water storage capacity, its development, to take advantage of years like this one. I mean, look how much water we're losing out on right now due to the massive excess that we've been blessed with this year. And so it seems shameful. We've got pretty much Lake Shasta and Lake Oroville topped off. I think Folsom will top off here. New Melones is doing pretty good. It's a little tougher one to fill. Of course, San Luis Reservoir, they managed to get that filled up. But Trinity Lake is lagging way behind. But we're doing pretty good for the most part. So when talking about the repayment and such, from your experience, what group of water users do you believe want to take advantage of this early repayment auction we're talking about? Is from the people you associate with, or more particularly to your district?
So over more than 90% of our districts underneath our umbrella of our agency have taken advantage of the repayment process under the WIN Act and the contract conversions. So it's very popular in our area and was used widely. And again, seems like that should be extended as an opportunity for others. But it varies, I think, by circumstance.
You see that as a good value for the taxpayer?
I do. I think it's, again, there's trade-offs with accelerating payments, but again, money being directed more readily and quickly to potentially for water storage projects, I think is very valuable in light of what we're facing in California and throughout the West.
Certainly, we have opportunities right now that are close to the top of the books. Actually, in my neighborhood, with the possible raise of Shasta Dam yielding 630,000 acre feet when you fill it, and then Sites Reservoir, which would also impound 1.5 million acre feet, would probably have 700, 800,000 right now if it existed. So certainly we need to look at all these aspects. Deputy Commissioner Brain here, as you'd mentioned, with the enactment of the WIN Act, storage funding from contract prepayment is currently $344 million. Is that a correct number?
It sounds correct, sir, but I'd have to get back to you on whether that's the actual.
Okay, that's
Thank you.
ballpark's fine, okay. So if the question I posed to Chairman Michael there, do you have an estimate for how much we might expect the Treasury's account for water storage projects to increase with the passage of the legislation 3675?
No, we don't right now. I'd be happy to work with you and your staff on that. The difficulty is we don't know the extent nor the type of entities that would be interested in utilizing this authority. We have the past experience that we have that's mentioned the success of utilizing the authority with respect to the 86 users that have already benefited from it. But without knowing more about the specifics of the types of entities that are out there that could use this in the future, we really are unaware of the impacts.
How about from existing program authorities? What recommendations would the Bureau be looking at that we could, with existing authority, to be able to expand storage projects?
Sorry, sir, I don't particularly understand the.
Does the Bureau have recommendations using existing program authorities to increase water storage project funding?
No, certainly. One of the things we're doing, Congressman, is utilizing the funding provided to us by the bipartisan infrastructure law to increase storage opportunities in the West. We've invested significant resources that were provided to us by the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we stood up a new small storage program to do so as well.
Okay, with legislation like the WIN Act that was a very bipartisan effort, there's contentions made that important regulations might be pushed aside with a passage of the Representative Bobert's bill. Do you agree with that estimation that indeed regulations will be pushed aside?
I would say that we agree that there would be a reduction in the administrative burdens that do currently exist.
So the burdens to your ability to carry out your tasks, your duties would be reduced?
It would be the burdens on the project partners who,
Yeah.
like the ones that my colleague would have detailed earlier.
Yeah, so a plus, okay. I see my time's expired, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamalfa. The chair recognizes Ms. Porter for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. About half of the members of this subcommittee represent residents of the Colorado Basin states. Deputy Commissioner Brain, how does Reclamation Basin's study program prevent these fine folks, our constituents, from going thirsty?
Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. The Basin Study Program really is a unique authority within Reclamation's portfolio. It allows us to bring together multiple types of stakeholders in a particular river basin to really gain intelligence as to what problems are facing their water scarcity issues in the future, and also what tools they may have in their quiver to be able to deal with those in the future.
What are the biggest problems? What are the biggest failures of the Basin Study Program at this time?
Congresswoman, again, I appreciate the question. I would say that a reauthorization of the Basin Studies Program would allow Reclamation to continue partnering with their stakeholders to ensure that we continue to carry out the work that's already going on.
So here we have a successful government program that is collaborating with different kinds of stakeholders, private, public, at different levels of government. And the biggest problem it has is that it's not reauthorized. Deputy Commissioner Brain, without the Basin Study Program, how will it be harder for utilities to provide water?
Where do we start? The challenges facing our Western partners in reclamation's mission are immense, and they're exacerbated by climate change. You yourself in the state of California have experienced compounding years of drought, followed by significant atmospheric rivers that came through in the early part of this year. What the Basin Studies program does is allow us to work with our partners who can be state, they can be local, they can be tribal, they can be water managers, to really come up with a suite of tools that identify the problems and utilize the best available science to address those in the future. And that could even point them towards funding decisions they may make.
Could our constituents go thirsty or have limited water during a drought if we don't manage our water resources as carefully as possible?
Reclamation's mission, Congresswoman, is to provide water and power to our western states. And certainly climate change and water scarcity is challenging our ability to carry out that mission.
This is a very sort of basic question, but what happens when people are thirsty?
I would say again, the mission of the Bureau of Reclamation is to provide water and power to them. The first of those would be water, because it is primary to the needs of our colleagues out in the West.
I notice this committee always very kindly provides water for all of its members because it's not fun to go thirsty. It's not good for your health. Does any member of Congress here want their constituents to go thirsty? Chairman Bentz, I knew you wouldn't raise your hand. When you put this bill up for legislative hearing, I knew you were serious about stopping Americans from being thirsty, and I need your help with the next step. I would love to have your commitment to marking up this bill and getting it onto the floor. I would like to yield to you for a yes or no response.
It's very kind of you, but I think I'll pass until I read your bill more carefully. And also, I'm going to be asking some questions of the Deputy Commissioner regarding the exact value of the program. I did reach out, just for your information, to folks who have used this program in the past. One didn't even remember it, and the other one was modestly supportive. And we'll continue to look into it.
Well, I appreciate your engagement, Mr. Chairman, and I'm looking forward to providing some more information to you about how this program helps folks in California, where we hear a lot of good things about it. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter of support that my office received yesterday from the National Water Resources Association for this bill, H.R. 3027. Specifically, they're supporting this bill as long as I make the change to the 7-year reauthorization, which I already signaled that I would do. May I enter this into the record?
Without objection.
Thank you. We have 3 months to extend this program. We have about 3 to 4 weeks left in our June, July, August before we hit that September reauthorization deadline. I really appreciate the chairman's interest in this issue, and I look forward to hearing his questions to the Deputy Commissioner. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. Chair recognizes Representative Gonzalez-Colon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Michael, in your testimony, you explained that since the WIN Act was enacted into law, over 80 entities, including nearly all of the 27 members of the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, have pursued repayment of their federal obligations under Section 4011 authority. My question will be, could you discuss some of the reasons they might explain why these entities and other reclamation contractors pursue accelerated repayment of their capital obligations, and what benefits do they gain from prepaying their outstanding federal obligations using the authorities provided under Section 4011 of the WIN Act?
As has been highlighted a little bit, one of the common reasons that water users pursue accelerated repayment is to remove the acreage limits and reporting requirements established by the Reclamation Reform Act, or RRA, which are very cumbersome and restrictive. The efficiencies gained by removing the RRA restrictions and requirements can be significant and lead many contractors to seek paying out their contracts sooner, which is one of the primary reasons. And it also increases some certainty for contractors regarding long-term water supply and allows entities to pursue title transfer in order to increase financing opportunities and streamline approvals. So each entity has different calculus that they look at as to why, but essentially probably those are the top reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And how do the federal government and American taxpayers benefit from this authority provided under Section 4011, allowing agricultural and municipal water users to prepay outstanding obligations? And how will permanently authorizing this section, as this bill, H.R. 3675 seeks to do, will benefit both reclamation contractors and the federal government?
Yeah, so I think the primary is getting the dollars back to the Treasury as earlier than would be as in the drawn-out process of the long-term repayments. And then also, as highlighted, that money going into the water storage account is helpful to get projects, badly needed projects that have time sensitivity based on what we're seeing from the changing climate and the variability that we're seeing in the droughts. And so again, we need projects in a more rapid time frame, and this would essentially get those payments upfront into that water storage account faster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses as well for coming today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Congresswoman Napolitano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brain, good to see you again, sir. My question is to you, Mr. Brain, in regard to the Basin Studies Program to assisting water managers assessing the risks and impacts of climate change on water resources at the regional level. And also, can you speak to the importance of collaboration between all federal agencies and the local water managers, plus the Native American tribes, in developing effective long-term management strategies and conservation?
Thank you, Congressman Napolitano. It's good to see you as well. You really hit the nail on the head with the benefits of the program. It really has a way of incorporating and bringing together a wider variety of stakeholders that are across the river basin that are really seeking common ground, and they do so by utilizing the best available science and in partnership with reclamation to identify those problems that they're looking to address. And as we mentioned earlier, they could be addressing them sort of operationally. They could be identifying potential funding opportunities that are out there. So it really is a way of bringing together a diverse group of stakeholders. And we've carried out 33 basin studies and would be happy to share with folks in the record some of the benefits of that.
Would like to see some of them, if you would, please. I think this committee would like to see them. I think that it is just that this current situation in drought in the western states has called for collaboration. I hope that this collaboration goes beyond this time and that it continues, especially with EPA. I know that I've been after the Army Corps of Engineers to include into their goals water storage. And I'm hoping that goes into one of the agencies that you talk to.
Congressman, thank you again for the question. Yes, no, we are constantly communicating with our colleagues across the federal government, and that includes the Corps of Engineers. As you very well know, Reclamation is a decentralized organization, so the vast majority of our 6,000 employees are spread out through the West, and they live and work in the same communities that our colleagues from the Corps do. So those conversations and the collaboration happen on a day-to-day basis.
Good. I'm just wondering how long that's going to take before both any federal agency, not just yours, actually puts the programs to work instead of waiting months and years sometimes before they are implemented. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Recognizes Congressman Duarte for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Commissioner Brain, welcome. Thank you for being here today. The Bureau of Reclamation does some important work on water infrastructure throughout the arid West, correct?
Congressman, we like to think so.
Yeah, I do. I do believe so. And when you build this infrastructure, it's got to be paid for over a period of time. It's bonded. It's financed with hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, of federal money. And would it be true to say that an important part of your evaluation for projects would be water rights?
Yes, sir.
And in California, we have water rights underpinning enormous federal investments in water infrastructure. And of course, those water rights and that water availability underpins, a $3.6 trillion annual economy and 42 million people's not going thirsty, as was of interest. Has the Bureau of Reclamation taken an interest in California legislature's recent efforts to rewrite our water rights, dissolve our current common law water rights system as it's established, and replace it with a complete authority under the State Water Resources Control Board?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. I'm sure that I have colleagues within the Bureau of Reclamation that are aware of and intimately familiar with that. Unfortunately, I came today prepared to discuss the three bills that are before the subcommittee, and I don't have the accurate information to be able to answer that question.
Okay. I would like you to get back to me on that. I am very concerned that your investments in the water infrastructure, canals, dams throughout California, the Central Valley Project, all the assets, are direly threatened by some emerging legislative efforts to dissolve California's well-established water rights system and to have those water rights allocated each year, potentially, by a newly elected legislature. And in doing that, even threatening to do that, I'm very concerned that it makes future infrastructure investment nearly impossible. Without the security of the water rights, how do we invest in long-term water infrastructure? And I'll ask that in the abstract, not the specific, since I realize, although you're a deputy commissioner, you may not have been prepared specifically for the immediate issue.
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, no, certainly happy to follow up with your staff and commit to you to work on an answer for that.
Mr. Michael, I know you've been around water for a while. Do you have any thoughts on these issues?
Water rights are obviously critical for municipalities and agricultural users and even our environmental users. So security of water and deliveries is what underpins our communities and the economy that we've built in California. So certainly can see a path forward to some potential changes to address some of the concerns, but certainly would think a wholesale rewrite of water rights would be extremely problematic and not beneficial. So I can see there's a path forward, but certainly don't want to, as you pointed out, a lot of investments have been made and values have been established, and it certainly would be very difficult.
Thank you. I am hoping the Bureau of Reclamation will take a look at this and assert itself into the potential, as you made the investments on behalf of the American taxpayer to develop the economy and the environmental priorities of California. Our ag system, our communities are all reliant upon these water assets, and to reallocate the water rights from them would certainly upset the expectations of the federal government and its interests when it funded these water assets.
Congressman, I look forward to following up with you on that. Truly do.
Another issue earlier this spring, I appreciate that. Earlier this spring, in many springs, many California farmers are waiting for their water allocations to come down. And understandably, there's a certain disposition for the Bureau of Reclamation to be cautious about overcommitting water in a given year until the snowmelt comes in and a minimum water allocation can be safely designated. This year, we didn't see water allocations really get finalized until March and April, when we had obvious abundant snowpack and water resources coming into the dams. Could you please help us understand or assure us that we can give earlier allocation information to our farmers so they can plan their operations in the future?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I certainly understand the concern, and as I mentioned before, the vast majority of our reclamation employees do live and work in communities throughout the American West, so they're intimately familiar with the natures of the work that takes place out there. So I do commit to work with you as we move forward on that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duarte. Chair recognizes Congressman Gallego for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bentz and Ranking Member Huffman. I'm glad to be here today to highlight a common sense bipartisan bill that will improve Arizona's clean energy storage capacity, improve energy reliability, and fight rising utility costs. As Arizona continues to grow and become a hub of industry and technology, it is more important than ever to make sure that we're prepared to supply the energy our state needs from reliable, renewable sources. Not only would improving our state's pumped storage hydropower facilities increase our overall energy supply, it would improve grid reliability. This is especially important in the hot summer months when blackouts would have major impacts on health and demand is at its highest. By allowing SRP to explore construction of additional facilities, HR 1607 is an important step in the right direction. Thank you, Ms. Myers, for being here today and for the work that SRP does providing reliable, sustainable electricity in our state. I have a couple questions for you. As you know, our home state of Arizona is blessed with 300+ days of sunshine and abundant solar resources. In fact, Arizona ranks as one of the top 5 states in the country when it comes to solar resources. How will pumped storage increase the amount of clean energy on the grid?
Thank you very much, Representative Gallego. Today, as we generate electricity from solar power, we are only capable of using that energy as it's produced. So having the ability to store that power really expands our capability to use renewable energy and expands our resiliency and flexibility.
With the proposed addition of new hydro pump storage, how confident are you and SRP that there are adequate water supplies for this project?
Thank you for that question. We actually operate pump-back storage on the reservoirs on the Salt River project, and we keep our reservoirs full for that same purpose, our lower 3 reservoirs. So we knowing that we would draw water from those reservoirs, it works very well within the system that we have today, and we're very confident that we have the water supplies that we need for the pump-back storage project.
And can you tell us how SRP selected the 2 sites it's exploring, adding this pump storage to, and why you're looking at specifically these 2 sites?
Yes, probably the key component of the site selection is that they're adjacent to our existing system. We have access to transmission, and we have existing withdrawn lands for a large portion of the project already. So it's actually the perfect site to add to the federal reclamation project.
Ms. Myers, how much energy would this produce?
We have the potential to produce about 2,000 megawatts, which is a significant portion of our overall capacity.
And how many megawatts does SRP generate in one day?
Our overall capacity is 900 megawatts.
So this is...
I'm sorry, 9,000 megawatts.
Okay. But this is definitely a good additive to that. Well, thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, June 20th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.